First story, The Unwanted Visitor by Emily Anderson. It was a cold, dark winter night in rural Pennsylvania. I had just returned from a long day at work, eager to relax in the warmth of my cozy little home. I lived alone, and although I usually enjoyed the solitude, that night, something felt off from the moment I stepped through the door. As I settled in with a cup of hot cocoa and my favorite book, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me, but the unease lingered. I decided to lock all the doors and windows, just to be on the safe side. Hours passed, and I began to drift off to sleep in my armchair. Suddenly, a faint scratching noise echoed through the house. My heart pounded as I realized it was coming from the front door. I peered through the curtains, but the porch was deserted, and the night was silent. I reluctantly chalked it up to the wind, though it was eerily calm outside. Just as I convinced myself to relax, a loud thud echoed from the kitchen. I leaped out of my chair and grabbed a nearby poker from the fireplace. As I inched closer to the kitchen, my heart raced, and my breath hitched in my throat. The kitchen light was on, and I could see an intruder, a tall and shadowy figure, rifling through my drawers. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't just stand there. My instincts took over, and I confronted the stranger. "Who are you, and what the hell are you doing in my house?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear and anger. The intruder turned slowly to face me, revealing a face hidden beneath a grotesque mask. It was pale and expressionless, adorned with ominous symbols. My blood ran cold as I took in the sight of it. "Get out!" I shouted, brandishing the poker like a weapon. The intruder hesitated, their cold, dead eyes locked onto mine. Then, without a word, they turned and fled through the back door. I chased them out, but they disappeared into the inky darkness of the woods behind my house. The adrenaline coursed through my veins as I locked the door behind them, panting and terrified. I immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes. They searched the surrounding area but found no trace of the intruder. They assured me that they would increase patrols in the area and recommended installing a security system. The following days were filled with anxiety and paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that the masked intruder might return. I installed a security system, changed my locks, and even considered moving. Sleepless nights turned into weeks of restless fear, and I couldn't help but wonder what the intruder had intended that night. To this day, I don't know who that person was or why they chose my home. The experience left me scarred, always looking over my shoulder, and never truly feeling safe in my own home. The unnerving thought that the intruder might still be out there haunts my dreams and keeps me on edge, forever alone in my house. Second story, The Silent Stalker by David Collins. I live in a quaint neighborhood in the heart of Chicago, in a charming old house that has been in my family for generations. It was a Friday evening, and I was looking forward to a peaceful night alone. Little did I know that the tranquility I craved would soon be shattered by a chilling encounter. As I was sitting in my living room, engrossed in a classic novel, I began to notice something peculiar. It was a persistent rustling sound, faint but unmistakable, coming from just beyond my window. I glanced outside, expecting to see a raccoon or a stray cat, but the dimly lit street was empty. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Brushing it off as paranoia, I continued reading, hoping the noise would fade away. But it persisted, growing louder and more distinct, as if someone was moving in the shadows just beyond the windowpane. Anxiety gnawed at my nerves as I realized that there was no rational explanation for the sounds. I decided to investigate. Carefully, I made my way to the window, peering out into the darkness. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine, a figure, obscured by the night, standing right beside the bushes, staring up at my window. I couldn't make out any details, but the silhouette was unmistakable. My heart raced as I backed away from the window, my mind racing with fear. I had to call the police. With trembling hands, I dialed 911 and explained the situation. The dispatcher assured me that an officer was on the way and advised me to stay inside. The minutes stretched into hours as I waited in terror, the rustling sounds outside continuing unabated. Finally, the police arrived, and I rushed to let them in. They swept the area around my house, but the stalker had vanished. The officer took my statement and assured me they would increase patrols in the area. They also suggested installing motion-activated lights and security cameras. After their departure, I followed their advice and made my home as secure as possible. Weeks turned into months, and the rustling sounds ceased. I tried to put the harrowing experience behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I became increasingly paranoid, drawing the curtains even during the day and jumping at every creak and rustle. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a soft knock on my front door. My heart plummeted as I crept to the door, peering through the peephole. I couldn't see anyone, but the sensation of being watched returned in full force. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, the stalker had vanished once more. Their presence brought no solace, as the threat remained elusive and unknown. To this day, I live in fear, the constant dread of being watched and stalked consuming my thoughts. The identity of the silent stalker remains a mystery, a lurking presence that refuses to release me from its sinister grip. Third story, The Haunting Echoes by Sarah Mitchell. My little home, tucked away in a serene corner of an English village, was my haven of solitude. On this particular evening, the wind howled through the trees, creating eerie echoes that seemed to reverberate within the walls of my cottage. I reveled in the calming sound, completely unaware that soon it would become the harbinger of a terrifying ordeal. I had just finished preparing a late dinner when I heard the faint sound of footsteps on the gravel path leading to my front door. My heart skipped a beat, as I wasn't expecting any visitors. I rushed to the window, peering out into the darkened street. There, standing beneath a flickering street lamp, was a stranger in a long, tattered coat and a wide-brimmed hat, their face obscured by the dim light. The visitor seemed disoriented, swaying slightly, and the sense of unease grew within me. I hesitated but finally decided to open the door just a crack, wanting to see if I could offer assistance. The stranger, without uttering a word, stumbled inside and collapsed onto the floor. I rushed to their side, trying to assess their condition. They were shivering, drenched from head to toe, and reeked of damp earth. The only sound they made was a low, haunting moan. Fear and sympathy welled up inside me, and I offered them a blanket and some hot tea. As they sipped the tea, I asked their name and if they needed help getting in touch with someone. But they remained silent, their eyes vacant, staring at nothing in particular. I felt a chill run down my spine, a growing unease that this encounter was not what it seemed. Suddenly, the eerie echoes of footsteps returned, louder and more pronounced, as if a group of people was approaching my cottage. Panic surged through me, and I ran to the window to see several more figures emerging from the darkness. They all wore tattered coats and wide-brimmed hats, just like the first visitor. Before I could react, they began pounding on my door, demanding entry. Fear consumed me, and I realized that I was no longer offering hospitality but was instead trapped in a nightmare. I bolted the door and retreated to the farthest corner of my living room, my heart pounding and my mind racing. The strangers outside continued to pound on the door, their voices low and ominous, like a sinister chorus. I called the police, frantically explaining the situation, but as I did, the echoes of the footsteps grew louder and louder, as if the intruders were coming closer. Minutes felt like an eternity as I huddled in the corner, praying for the police to arrive. When they finally did, the strangers outside vanished into the night, leaving no trace. The officers searched the area but found nothing. I was left shaken, my once peaceful home forever tainted by the haunting echoes of that night. To this day, I wonder who those strangers were and what they wanted. The fear of their return lingers, a haunting presence that invades the solitude I once cherished in my cottage. 3 unique stories, each capturing the essence of a home alone horror scenario without resorting to supernatural elements. 4th story, The Cryptic Messages by Jason Williams. I reside in a quiet neighborhood in the suburbs of Los Angeles, and my small, unassuming house was a sanctuary of peace for me. One balmy summer night, I was engrossed in my work, trying to meet a pressing deadline for my job. The hum of my computer was my only companion, or so I thought. As I typed away, I began to hear a faint tapping sound, like fingernails lightly drumming on glass. I assumed it was just the wind or a nearby tree branch, but the rhythm of the tapping felt deliberate, almost rhythmic. I glanced out the window but saw nothing amiss. The tapping persisted and grew louder, creating an unsettling cadence that seemed to echo through my house. I decided to investigate, heading downstairs to check the front door. To my surprise, there was an envelope taped to the glass, and a single word was scrawled on it in bold, black letters: "Watch." My heart raced as I tore open the envelope, and inside was a cryptic message written on a torn piece of notebook paper. It read, "They're watching. You're not alone. Leave while you can." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt a chill in the pit of my stomach. The message was vague and foreboding, and I couldn't fathom who might have left it. Fear gnawed at me as I scanned my surroundings, wondering if I was being observed. I decided to lock all the doors and windows, drawing the curtains tight, but the tapping sound persisted, growing louder and more persistent. I was convinced someone was playing a cruel prank on me, trying to rattle my nerves. Still, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over me. As the night wore on, the tapping gave way to an incessant scratching, as if someone was trying to claw their way inside. I called the police, explaining the situation. They promised to send an officer but advised me to stay hidden and secure. I crouched in a corner of my living room, heart pounding, as the scratching sound continued, growing louder and more frenzied. Minutes stretched into hours, and I was on the verge of losing my sanity when the police finally arrived. The officers searched the area, finding no one, and speculated that it might have been a prank or a bored teenager. They assured me that they would increase patrols and recommended installing security cameras. Despite their assurances, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that the message was more than just a prank. I never did discover who left it, and the fear of being watched lingered, casting a shadow over my once peaceful home. Fifth story, The Phantom Footsteps by Maria Santos. I had moved to a remote cabin in the pine forests of Oregon to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. It was a tranquil place, but as time went on, the isolation began to take its toll. One evening, I was startled by a sound that would shake the very foundations of my sanity. It was a night like any other, the forest shrouded in an eerie silence. I was reading by the warm glow of the fireplace when I heard it, a faint but unmistakable sound of footsteps. It was as if someone was pacing just outside my cabin, their boots crunching on the fallen leaves. I held my breath, thinking it might be a curious animal, but the steps grew closer, too deliberate to be in animals. I cautiously peered through the window but saw only the dark expanse of the forest. The footsteps continued, and a shiver crawled down my spine as I realized that there was no rational explanation. I decided to lock all the doors and windows, my heart racing as the phantom footsteps circled my cabin. The unsettling sounds persisted for hours, growing louder and more menacing. It was as if someone was toying with me, deliberately trying to instill fear. I called the local sheriff, who promised to send a deputy but warned me it might take a while due to the cabin's remote location. As I waited for help to arrive, the footsteps reached a fever pitch, echoing through my cabin with a malevolent force. I huddled in a corner, my fear mounting, as the sounds seemed to surround me from all sides. When the deputy finally arrived, he searched the area but found no trace of the intruder. He assured me that it might have been a vagrant passing through or a prankster trying to unnerve me. Despite his words, I couldn't shake the feeling that the phantom footsteps were something more sinister, a haunting presence that refused to release its grip on my solitude. These 5 stories capture the essence of the horror of being home alone, each with its own unique twist, but all grounded in realism and fear. Sixth story, The Cursed Relic by Thomas Robinson. My home was a charming, centuries-old cottage nestled in the historic town of Edinburgh, Scotland. I had always been fascinated by antiques and relics, and my home was filled with items from different eras. Little did I know that one particular artifact would unleash a nightmare of horrors that would shake me to my core. It all began when I acquired a mysterious relic from an antique shop tucked away in the old cobblestone streets of the city. The relic was a peculiar mirror, ornately framed with intricate carvings and symbols. The shopkeeper had warned me that the mirror had a dark history, but I dismissed it as mere superstition. One evening, as I was alone in my home, I decided to clean the mirror, which had grown dusty from neglect. I carefully wiped away the grime, revealing a pristine, reflective surface. But as I gazed into the mirror, a feeling of dread washed over me. I saw a flicker of movement in the reflection, something in the shadows behind me. My heart raced as I turned, but there was nothing there. It was as if the mirror had played tricks on me. I convinced myself it was my imagination, a result of reading too many ghost stories. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I decided to lock the mirror away in my attic, hoping to rid myself of the unnerving sensation. But as I placed the mirror in the dark corner of the attic, I noticed something peculiar, a faint whisper, like the voices of the long-forgotten souls imprisoned within the glass. Terrified, I fled from the attic, bolting the door behind me. The attic became a forbidden place, a realm of dread, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't bear the torment any longer and decided to seek the help of a local priest. The priest performed a blessing, but it had no effect. The mirror remained as unsettling as ever, and the whispers continued. I became consumed by an overwhelming paranoia and fear that the relic had brought malevolent spirits into my home. One night, I awoke to the sound of chanting and bizarre incantations echoing through my house. I followed the eerie sounds, my heart pounding, and they led me back to the attic. The mirror was no longer locked away. It had returned to its rightful place in my living room. In my panic, I called the priest once more, and he arrived as swiftly as he could. He performed a more elaborate exorcism, but it was in vain. The mirror refused to be cleansed of its malevolence. The torment continued, and I realized that I had unwittingly brought a curse into my home. The relic had become a portal for something dark and otherworldly, something that wanted to consume me. I decided to take drastic measures. I shattered the mirror, but as it fractured, an unholy scream filled the room, and the pieces reassembled themselves, as if the mirror was indestructible. The torment continued, and I knew there was only one way to escape it. I had to leave my home behind. To this day, I am haunted by the curse of the mirror, a relic that imprisoned me in my own house and left me with no choice but to abandon it. The horror of that fateful artifact lingers in my memories, a testament to the dangers of delving into the unknown. 7th story, The Vanishing Neighbor by Emma Reed. I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Denver, Colorado, and I cherished the solitude of my home. However, one summer, a series of bizarre events unfolded that would shatter the tranquility I held dear. My neighbor, Mr. Thompson, was a reclusive man who lived alone in a small house next door. He rarely ventured outside and had a reputation for being eccentric. He had never been anything but polite to me, so I thought nothing of it. One scorching afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, I noticed an odd occurrence. Mr. Thompson's curtains were drawn, and his front door stood slightly ajar. I called out a greeting but received no response. Concerned, I approached his house and cautiously pushed the door open. The interior was eerily quiet, and the air was thick with an unpleasant, metallic scent. I called out for Mr. Thompson once more, my voice echoing through the silent house. As I ventured further in, I came across a chilling sight: a half-eaten meal on the dining table, a still warm cup of tea, and a chair pushed back as if someone had abruptly left the table. I ascended the creaking stairs, each step sending shivers down my spine, and reached Mr. Thompson's bedroom. The door was ajar, and inside, I found his bed in disarray, as though he had left in a hurry. His clothes and personal belongings were scattered about, a clear sign that something was amiss. Panic set in as I searched the rest of the house, but Mr. Thompson was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I called the police, who arrived promptly to investigate. They interviewed neighbors, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual. Days turned into weeks, and the search for Mr. Thompson yielded no results. His house remained empty, a haunting reminder of his inexplicable disappearance. The eerie silence of my neighborhood, once so comforting, now felt suffocating, as the mystery of his vanishing neighbor loomed large. To this day, no one knows what became of Mr. Thompson. The fear of the unknown lingers, casting a shadow over the once peaceful neighborhood and my home. The chilling puzzle of his disappearance remains unsolved, a ghostly presence that haunts my every thought. These two stories delve into unsettling situations that go beyond the realm of the normal, leaving a sense of dread and uncertainty that lingers long after the events have unfolded. 8th story, The Flickering Shadows by Robert Miller. My home, located in a quiet, leafy suburb of London, was a quaint cottage with a history dating back centuries. It had always been a source of comfort, but one dark winter evening, that comfort was shattered by an inexplicable and chilling occurrence. I had settled down in my cozy living room, the warm glow of the fireplace casting dancing shadows on the walls. The room was bathed in a comforting half-light when, suddenly, the shadows began to flicker and dance in a most unnatural way. At first, I thought it might be a draft or a trick of the firelight, but the unsettling movements persisted. As I watched, the shadows seemed to take on grotesque forms, writhing and shifting as if they had a life of their own. They contorted into eerie shapes, resembling faceless figures that stretched and twisted, their movements a mockery of the laws of nature. A sense of profound unease settled over me. I tried to ignore the phenomenon, but the shadows seemed to draw closer, creeping along the walls like sinister specters. I rose from my seat to investigate, but as I approached, the flickering shadows retreated, as if taunting my curiosity. I tried to dispel the eerie presence, turning on all the lights in the room, but it made no difference. The shadows continued to dance, their macabre forms growing more grotesque. Panic gripped me as I realized I was not alone in my home. Something unnatural was lurking in the shadows. I called a paranormal investigator, who arrived with equipment to monitor the room. But despite their efforts, they could find no explanation for the bizarre phenomenon. The flickering shadows defied all logic and reason, and I was left with a sense of dread that refused to dissipate. To this day, I live in the constant fear of the flickering shadows, a haunting presence that has invaded my once peaceful home. The source of this eerie occurrence remains a mystery, casting a pall of uncertainty over the familiar surroundings I once cherished. Ninth story, The Relentless Storm by Lisa Anderson. I lived in a charming seaside cottage in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It was my sanctuary, a place to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. But one summer, a relentless storm would turn my peaceful retreat into a house of horrors. The storm had been raging for days, the wind howling and the rain relentless. I huddled inside my cottage, the sounds of the tempest battering the windows and walls. It was a night like no other when a deafening thunderclap shook the very foundations of my home. As I tried to find solace in the pages of a book, the power suddenly went out, plunging me into darkness. The flickering candlelight offered little comfort as I listened to the storm's fury outside. But that was when I noticed something unusual, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, soft and tentative, as if someone were walking through the house. My heart raced as I called out, "Who's there?" But the footsteps continued, growing closer. Panic set in as I realized that I was alone in the house, or so I had thought. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the hallway, the beam of light revealing nothing but the storm-tossed trees outside. The footsteps persisted, leading me through the darkened house. They seemed to echo with a sense of purpose, as if guided by an unseen presence. Desperation gnawed at me, and I called the police, explaining the bizarre situation. The officers arrived in the midst of the storm, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They searched the house and its surroundings but found no intruder, no signs of forced entry. They assured me it might have been a product of the storm's fury, playing tricks on my mind. Despite their assurances, the relentless storm and its unsettling echoes continued. The footsteps became a haunting presence, a reminder that I was not alone in my once tranquil cottage. To this day, the source of those phantom footsteps remains a mystery, an enigma that casts a shadow over the sanctuary I once cherished. 10th story, The Whispers of the Past by Michael Johnson. My home, an old Victorian house in the heart of New Orleans, was steeped in history and had been in my family for generations. It was a place of nostalgia and comfort, but one summer night, the house revealed a dark secret from its past that would shake me to my core. As I sat in my dimly lit library, engrossed in a family photo album, a faint whisper floated through the air, as if carried by the gentle breeze that wafted through the open window. I paused, straining to hear more clearly. It was a voice, soft and mournful, seemingly filled with sorrow. I looked around the room, convinced that I was imagining things. But then I heard it again, the same whisper, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a voice from the past, echoing through time. Intrigued and unnerved, I decided to investigate further. I ventured into the dimly lit hallway, where the whispers grew more pronounced, as if guiding me. They led me to a locked door that I had always assumed led to a storage room. I fumbled for the key and, as I turned it in the lock, a cold draft swept through the room, and the whispers grew even louder. The room was filled with old family heirlooms, photographs, and mementos, but at the center was a dusty, forgotten diary. As I opened the diary and began to read, I discovered a dark and tragic tale from my family's history. It detailed a love affair that had ended in betrayal, heartbreak, and a death shrouded in mystery. The whispers seemed to be the voices of the long departed, the echoes of the past reaching out to tell their story. The diary revealed the secrets of the house, the sorrow and despair that had lingered in its walls for generations. I couldn't escape the haunting realization that the house had been a silent witness to a tragedy that had never found closure. To this day, the whispers of the past continue to echo through my home, a reminder of the dark secrets hidden within the walls of the old Victorian house. The discovery of that diary changed the way I saw my family's history and the place I had always called home. Thank you for sticking with us through the whole video. Also, I recommend you this video you see on screen, one of the scariest on my channel. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. This helps me bring you more thrilling content every day. If this video sent shivers down your spine, let me know in the comments.